The lake had always been there, long before the subdivision, long before the grocery store with its buzzing neon lights, long before anyone thought about organizing a homeowners association. It was a natural jewel tucked into the landscape, its waters stretching out like a mirror to the sky, ringed with tall cattails and whispering willows that bent their boughs into the shallows. In the early mornings, the mist would rise from its surface, curling like pale smoke and catching the first glints of sunlight. For decades, it had been the kind of place people stumbled upon by accident and never forgot. A sanctuary of quiet that seemed untouched by the noisy ambitions of human life. On any given day, the lake drew its own kind of congregation. There were fishermen, patient and slow-moving, who brought tackle boxes filled with lures and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. They'd set up folding chairs at the edge of the bank, crack open a thermos of coffee, and wait with the kind of patience most people forgot existed. Then there were the children who came running down the slope in summer, shoes abandoned halfway across the grass, their laughter splashing as loudly as the stones they hurled into the water. Couples strolled hand in hand, leaning against each other as they watched the sunset paint the surface pink and gold. The lake never discriminated. It belonged to all who respected it, whether their stay lasted 5 minutes or 5 hours. What made the lake so remarkable was not just its beauty, but its ability to transform whoever visited. People arrived with the weight of grocery lists, office deadlines, family squabbles pressing down on their shoulders. But after an hour at the water's edge, they left lighter, their minds unknotted. Teenagers from the nearby high school would sometimes wander there after a tough exam, lying in the grass and watching the clouds shift until the sting of failure softened into perspective. Elderly couples would sit side by side on portable stools, recalling summers of their youth and quietly finding comfort in the repetition of old memories. The lake, in its way, was therapy-free and endless. No appointments necessary. Its wildlife gave it a living pulse. Mallards paddled through the reeds in neat pairs, their green heads shimmering in the light. Dragonflies hovered above the water like jeweled helicopters, darting and veering in quicksilver arcs. At night, frogs sang in low chorus, blending with the soft rustle of leaves as the wind drifted across the shoreline. Even the fish were part of the rhythm, their silver backs flashing when they leapt for insects, sending ripples outward and expanding. Circles, the lake was never still. It was a quiet symphony, a place of movement and sound, but always gentle, always balanced. For years, the lake had no fences, no gates, no rules posted on cheap wooden boards. People understood instinctively how to behave. Trash was rarely left behind. Families often carried out more than they brought in. And the occasional bottle or wrapper that did appear was quickly plucked away by someone who cared. It was a community. Without a contract, a trust, without signatures. The unwritten rule was simple. If you came to the lake, you respected the lake. That was all it asked. That was all it needed. The surrounding land was unremarkable in a real estate sense, just a wide swath of meadow grass leading down to the water, dotted with wildflowers in spring and crunchy leaves in fall. Developers had eyed it more than once, murmuring about how many townhomes could fit along the ridge, or how valuable a private clubhouse might be if it overlooked the water. But each time, the plans fizzled. Something about the lake resisted intrusion, as if the very soil conspired to protect itself from the march of profit. Locals joked that the lake had a will of its own, a stubbornness that mirrored their own reluctance to see it spoiled. Children grew up alongside it, layering their own history into its shoreline. They learned how to swim by kicking clumsily in, the shallow end, parents waiting nervously behind. They carved their initials into tree trunks nearby, hoping the marks would last forever, a secret testimony of their childhood loves. They tied makeshift rafts together, daring each other to paddle to the center before abandoning the soggy crafts and swimming back, laughing. And when those children grew older, they returned with their own kids, telling stories that began with, "The inevitable, when I was your age, I used to come here all the time." The lake was a generational anchor, holding memory after memory in its still waters. On summer nights, when the air was thick with warmth and the stars burned brighter, away from the town's glare, the lake was at its most magical. Fireflies hovered over the grass like tiny lanterns, winking in and out as if in conversation. Families lit small campfires a safe distance from the water, roasting marshmallows and watching sparks spiral upward. The scent of smoke mingled with the fresh coolness drifting off the lake's surface. It was the kind of place where silence wasn't awkward. It was welcome. It was easy. It was enough. Everyone felt that the lake belonged to them, not in a legal sense, but in the truest sense of shared belonging. That was why no one ever expected change. The lake had always been open, always been shared, always been free. To imagine someone claiming ownership was laughable, like suggesting a person could own the wind or the stars. But deep beneath the rippling surface, quiet truth lay waiting. Land deeds and property lines existed, and one day someone might put a price on the priceless. That day had not yet come, but the possibility lingered in the shadows, unnoticed, by those who basked in the sunlight. Until then, the lake remained peaceful. Its shores welcomed the familiar shuffle of feet, its waters embraced laughter, its skyward reflection carried the dreams of every passerby. The people who came to the lake didn't know how lucky they were, not really. They assumed such places would always remain, that such beauty was eternal and immune to human interference. They never guessed that one day soon their sanctuary would become a battleground between entitlement and ownership, between illusion and law. For now, though, the lake breathed easily. Its peace was intact, its waters free. If the lake was a sanctuary, the subdivision on the ridge above it was the opposite. Rows of nearly identical houses, two-car garages, manicured lawns clipped to regulation height, flower beds lined with the same brand of mulch sat, shoulder to shoulder like polite but nosy neighbors at a cocktail party. It wasn't just a neighborhood. It was an empire of conformity, ruled by a single woman whose word carried more weight than most county ordinances. Karen Miller, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Karen hadn't been elected in any real democratic sense. The first families moved into Willow Creek. The developers had created an HOA to maintain community standards. At the very first meeting, while others were still arguing about whether the clubhouse should serve free coffee, Karen had swept in with a clipboard, a printed agenda, and a self-declared title, Acting President. No one challenged her. By the second meeting, she had drafted bylaws thick enough to rival a small-town charter. By the third, she had a committee in place, though most volunteers were her neighbors who hadn't realized attending meant they'd been conscripted. From then on, Karen ruled with the kind of authority only someone with too much free time and too little perspective could wield. She enforced lawn inspections with a tape measure to ensure grass height didn't exceed 3 inches. She issued written warnings if someone's recycling bin remained visible from the street for longer than 2 hours after pickup. She even scolded children for chalk drawings on driveways, calling them visual clutter. People grumbled, but Karen always waved the bylaws in their faces, reminding them they had agreed to the rules when they signed their closing papers. And besides, no one wanted to deal with the headache of fighting. Hercran thrived on conflict, and everyone knew it. But the lake was her obsession. Though it technically sat outside the subdivision's property lines, Karen insisted it was a shared amenity of the greater Willow Creek community. She would bring it up in every meeting, underlining phrases in her binder about common spaces and aesthetic harmony. She claimed the lake fell under HOA jurisdiction because it affects property values. Therefore, all usage had to be regulated. Nobody had the energy to challenge her. So her reign over the lake began, not with ownership, but with sheer audacity. Her first move was signage. One morning, residents woke to find homemade wooden boards hammered into the dirt near the shoreline. Willow Creek HOA rules apply beyond this point. Nitrogen monoxide, fishing without permit, nitrogen monoxide, glass, no loud music, not pets without leash. At the bottom, in bold red letters, were the words everyone had learned to fear. Violators will be fined. Of course, the fines were imaginary. Karen had no authority beyond the subdivision's borders, and county officials rolled their eyes whenever she called about enforcement. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that most people didn't know the difference, and Karen counted on that ignorance. She began patrolling the lake personally, clipboard in hand, ready to pounce on unsuspecting visitors. A fisherman. With 2 poles? That's over the limit. Teenagers tossing a football in the water? Absolutely no unsanctioned activities. A family hosting a picnic? Charcoal grills are strictly prohibited. Each confrontation ended the same way. Karen, snapping a photo with her phone, scribbling furiously on her clipboard, and promising a formal notice in the mail. Whether or not those notices had any legal standing was irrelevant. Most people complied just to avoid her wrath. Soon, the lake's atmosphere began to change. Fewer families visited in the evenings. The fishermen stopped bringing their kids, tired of the lectures about quiet hours. Even the teenagers, once fearless, started avoiding the place, unwilling to be the next victims of Karen's tirades. The lake was still beautiful, still serene, but the presence of one woman had poisoned it with tension. Karen, of course, was thrilled. To her, fewer visitors meant more control. She began treating the lake as her personal backyard, staging HOA-approved events that no one had actually asked for. She organized cleanup days, where she stood supervising while volunteers picked up imaginary trash. She held wildlife preservation seminars, which consisted mostly of her reading random facts about geese from the internet. She even floated the idea of building a fence around the lake, with residents-only keycard access, though too expensive to ever materialize. The suggestion revealed just how far she was willing to go. Behind closed doors, neighbors whispered about her. Some joked she should wear a ranger's uniform, complete with a hat and badge. Others said she was the sheriff of nothing, patrolling land that wasn't hers. But whenever talk turned serious, like suggesting the HOA should replace Herno, one wanted to step forward. Karen had turned the role into a fortress, and anyone who opposed her quickly found themselves targeted with violation notices, fines, and relentless random inspections. And so, the lake remained under her shadow. It was an odd kind of tyranny. One woman, no actual power, yet somehow dictating how others lived their lives. For Karen, it wasn't about the law or fairness. It was about control. She didn't see herself as a bully, but as a protector, guarding the community from chaos. Without her, she argued, the lake would surely become overrun with vandals, litterbugs, and those types of outsiders she never defined but always alluded to. Still, cracks in her empire began to show. A few brave souls ignored her rules, fishing without permits or swimming past dusk, daring her to escalate. She responded with threats of police calls, threats that went nowhere when officers politely explained she had no jurisdiction. Each failed attempt chipped at her authority, though she doubled down with new tactics, bigger signs, longer lectures, and more desperate claims about her legal mandate. The truth was, Karen's reign over the lake balanced on a fragile illusion. As long as people believed she had power, she did. But if that illusion broke, if someone came along with real authority, with actual paperwork to back their words, then her entire empire would collapse. She knew it, though she would never admit it. And somewhere in the back of her mind, perhaps late at night when the clipboard was set aside, she feared that day would come. The day came sooner than anyone expected. But for now, Karen still strutted along the shoreline, barking at teenagers, snapping photos of soda cans, and scribbling her endless notes. She was queen of the subdivision, empress of the bylaws, ruler of the lake-core, so she believed. For weeks, the lake had simmered under the tension of Karen's watchful eye. Families tiptoed along its banks, children whispered instead of shouted, and fishermen sat with their shoulders hunched as if waiting for judgment. The water itself seemed quieter, as though even the frogs and dragonflies were hesitant under her constant surveillance. And then, one Tuesday morning, everything changed. It began with the rumble of an old blue pickup truck. The vehicle was dusty, its paint chipped, and it carried in its bed a collection of curious cargo: a folded lawn chair, a tackle box, and a bright white sign wrapped in plastic. The truck pulled off the narrow road and parked at the edge of the meadow, just where the grass dipped toward the shoreline. Out stepped a man in his 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing jeans that had seen better days and a ball cap that had been through countless fishing trips. His name was Jordan Wells. Unlike Karen, Jordan carried no clipboard, no binder, no air of self-importance. He walked with an easy confidence, as though the land beneath his boots already belonged to him. He strolled down the slope, planted the lawn chair into the dirt, and unwrapped the sign. With a hammer from his truck, he drove it into the earth with 3 steady swings. The bold black letters glared at the world like a challenge. Private property. Nitrogen. Trespassing without owner's consent. This lake is now privately owned, and beneath, handwritten in red paint, one final line that would become legend. Karen, I'm not in your HOA. By lunchtime, word had spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. The lake, their lake, was privately owned, bought and claimed by a man none of them knew. Phones buzzed, texts flew, and before the afternoon sun had warmed the water, Karen herself had marched down the hill, fury in every step. She wore her usual uniform, khakis ironed sharp enough to cut glass, a floral blouse buttoned high at the collar, and oversized sunglasses that hid her eyes but not her outrage. In one hand, she clutched her ever-present binder. In the other, a rolled-up HOA rulebook like a weapon. "Excuse me?" She barked before she was even within 10 feet of him. "What do you think you're doing?" Jordan didn't stand. He simply leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, a fishing rod propped beside him. Gave her a calm, almost amused smile. "Afternoon, I'm fishing." Karen's sunglasses glinted like a hawk's eyes. "No, you're trespassing. This is Willow Creek HOA jurisdiction. You can't just put up a sign like that. It violates community standards." Jordan reached into the tackle box, pulled out a laminated sheet of paper, and handed it to her without rising. "Deed," he said simply. Karen blinked. Wasn't used to being interrupted with facts. She took the paper with a snap and scanned it. Her lips moved as she read parcel numbers, acreage descriptions, the legal jargon of land transfer, and there, in bold at the bottom, was his name, Jordan Wells. He didn't just own the meadow. He didn't just own the shoreline. He owned the lake itself, water and all. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She flipped pages in her binder desperately, as though the bylaws of Willow Creek could somehow override a county record. Well, you may think you own it," she stammered, "but you still have to comply with HOA regulations. This body of water directly affects property values." Jordan gave a low chuckle, not unkind. "But firm, lady, I'm not in your HOA. This lake is mine. The paperwork's right there." The simplicity of his statement was like a hammer blow. For the first time, Karen faltered. She was used to neighbors who wilted under her glare, people who muttered apologies and promised to fix the offense. But Jordan didn't apologize. He didn't argue. He just told the truth, and the truth was undeniable. Still, Karen was not a woman to retreat. She snapped the deed shut and shoved it back at him. "This isn't over," she hissed. "The community will not stand for this. You'll be hearing from me, and from the board, and from who?" Jordan interrupted, his tone light but edged with steel. "From your book club? From your committee of lawn inspectors? You can call whoever you like, but I bought this lake fair and square. It's not yours. It never was." Karen flushed red beneath her sunglasses. She spun on her heel, muttering about legal violations and reckless behavior as she stormed back up the hill. Behind her, Jordan cast his line into the water, the reel clicking smoothly as if nothing had happened. For him it was just another day by the lake. For Karen, it was the beginning of war. Within 24 hours, Karen had mobilized. Flyers appeared on every front door in Willow Creek, warning residents of an unauthorized individual attempting to seize control of community resources. An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled, complete with refreshments and a slideshow presentation. She fired off emails to county officials, local police, and even a state representative, citing environmental concerns and public safety hazards. But each response she received chipped away at her illusion of control. The county clerk confirmed the deed was valid. The sheriff's office stated clearly that the property was private and complaints should be directed to civil court. Even the state office politely informed her that private ownership of bodies of water is a recognized legal matter outside our jurisdiction. Meanwhile, Jordan made himself comfortable. He brought down a second lawn chair, an ice chest, and a portable radio. He waved at joggers, offered cold sodas to curious teenagers, and even taught a boy how to bait a hook. Far from chasing people away, he welcomed them so long as they respected the space. You treat it right, you're welcome. Here, he told anyone who asked, but don't mistake it, it's mine. This balance-open invitation, yet firm ownership, only enraged Karen further. She couldn't stand that people seemed to like him, that her dire warnings went ignored. Every smile Jordan gave, every friendly gesture, was another crack in the wall of authority she had spent years constructing, and so the stage was set. The lake was no longer simply a place of peace. It had become a battlefield of wills. Karen clinging desperately to her imagined empire, and Jordan, the unflinching new owner with the law on his side, one ruled by illusion, the other by deed. Both were determined not to yield. The water shimmered under the late summer sun, innocent of the human drama unfolding on its shores. But for the people of Willow Creek, the lake would never be the same again. If Jordan's arrival was a stone thrown into still water, the ripples spread fast. Within days, the once peaceful lake transformed into a contested ground. On one side was Jordan, steady as a rock, armed with paperwork, patience, and a wry sense of humor. On the other was Karen, a whirlwind of outrage, clipboards, and self-righteous speeches. Between them stood the rest of Willow Creek, bewildered neighbors forced to choose whether to side with the woman they had tolerated for years or the stranger, who now, by law, owned their beloved Lake. Karen escalated first. She was incapable of doing otherwise. After her failed attempts with county offices, she turned to the tools she knew best: fear and bureaucracy. She crafted glossy official notices, stamped with the Willow Creek HOA letterhead, declaring that all lake activities are suspended pending investigation. She cited non-existent state safety codes and claimed that toxic algae threatened swimmers. She even threatened to impose fines of up to $500 for trespassing on restricted water. Most neighbors rolled their eyes. A few, however, fell in line, unwilling to risk Karen's wrath. They stopped visiting, muttering apologies when their children asked to go fishing or swimming. Others quietly defied her, sneaking down at dusk to cast a line, hoping Karen was too busy polishing her binder tabs to notice. Jordan, for his part, simply shrugged. "Let them come," he said. "The lake's here for anyone who respects it. But it's mine, not hers." But Karen was not content with flyers and threats. She staged her presence like a general defending a border. Every morning, she marched down in her wide-brimmed sun hat, folding chair slung over one arm, a thermos of black coffee in the other. She planted herself near the water's edge, clipboard ready, daring Jordan to challenge her. He didn't. Instead, he set up camp 20 yards away, fishing rod in hand, radio playing country songs at a low volume. They sat there for hours, glaring across the water like rival monarchs on opposite thrones. The community began to take sides. Supporters of Karen brought their own chairs, forming what she dubbed the Lake Preservation Committee. They wore name tags she printed herself and took turns jotting violations in spiral notebooks. Supporters of Jordan mostly, teenagers, young families, and a few rebellious retirees gathered on his side, swapping snacks and cheering whenever he reeled in a fish. The meadow turned into an unspoken line of division, one half ruled by bylaws, the other by deed. It didn't take long for tensions to spill over. One Saturday afternoon, as children splashed near Jordan's camp, Karen stormed over, screeching about unsanctioned swimming. Jordan rose calmly, intercepting her mid-rant. "They're my guests," he said evenly. "I gave them permission. That's all that matters." Karen jabbed her finger toward the water. "This lake is a community resource. Can't just grant permission like some medieval landlord." "Funny you say that, because I've got the papers that say exactly that." The children giggled. Karen spun on them, furious. "Oh, this isn't funny. You're teaching these kids to disrespect authority." Jordan tipped his cap. No, ma'am. I'm teaching them that real authority comes from the law, not from who yells the loudest. The words spread quickly, repeated in whispers and texts. Real authority comes from the law, not from who yells the loudest. For the first time, people began questioning not just Karen's control, but the entire premise of her HOA empire. Undeterred, Karen tried new tactics. She called the sheriff again. This time an officer did show up, tired but polite, after what must have been the 50th call in 2 weeks. He listened to both sides, looked at Jordan's deed, and sighed. He said firmly, "The lake is his. You don't have jurisdiction here. If you keep calling us about this, it'll be considered misuse of emergency services." Karen's face turned scarlet. For once, she was speechless. Jordan simply offered the officer a cold soda, which the man accepted gratefully before driving off. The moment was a victory for Jordan, and the crowd on his side cheered. But Karen's resolve only hardened. If she couldn't win with law, she would win with numbers. She rallied her allies, organizing community protests along the shoreline. She arrived with poster boards scrawled with slogans, "Our lake, our rules, protect property, values," and, most dramatically, "No trespassing on community heritage." Jordan, amused, brought his own sign, a simple whiteboard on which he wrote new messages each day. Day 1, still not in your HOA. Day 2, deed greater than binder. Day 3, catch of the day, Karen's complaints. Each sign earned laughter from his supporters, further inflaming Karen. The lake, once serene, now resembled a small-scale protest camp, with dueling slogans fluttering in the breeze. Yet through it all, Jordan remained calm. He fished. He shared snacks. He welcomed newcomers. Karen shouted, scribbled notes, and paced like a general losing ground. The standoff reached its peak one warm evening when Karen, in a fit of desperation, paddled out onto the water in a borrowed kayak. She declared loudly that she was exercising squatters' rights, claiming that occupying the center of the lake gave her control over it. Jordan, suppressing laughter, borrowed another kayak and paddled out beside her. From his pocket, he pulled a laminated map, the official property survey. "See these lines?" he said, pointing to the ink. "Every inch of water, every reed, every cattail, it's mine. You can float out here all you want, but you're floating on my property." Karen's jaw clenched. For the first time, the neighbors on shore laughed, openly not at Jordan's wit, but at her absurdity. She looked around, realizing she had lost not just the argument, but the audience. The illusion of her authority was cracking wide open. She paddled back to shore in silence, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Jordan followed leisurely, whistling as though it were all just another fishing trip. The moment was symbolic, the queen dethroned. The new owner triumphant not by shouting, but by proof, patience, and a laminated map. The standoff didn't end that day, but its balance shifted. Karen's followers dwindled. Her binder lost its power, and though she still appeared at the lake, still scribbled in her notebooks, the community no longer treated her as the authority. They turned instead to Jordan, who sat in his chair by the water, offering soda and stories, reminding them that peace didn't come from rules, but from respect. The lake, caught between them, began to heal. Children laughed again. Families picnicked. Without fear of lectures, though Karen still glared from the shadows, the standoff had already chosen its victor. By late summer, standoff at the lake had become a spectacle. What began as whispered arguments between Karen and Jordan was now a running drama that the whole town followed. People who had never cared much for Willow Creek began stopping by just to witness the bizarre to-go-vor. Teenagers filmed TikToks of Jordan's sarcastic whiteboard messages, parents gossiped at the grocery store about Karen's latest meltdown, and fishermen laughed about how the quietest lake in the county had turned into the weirdest show on earth. Karen, however, wasn't laughing. The more people sided with Jordan, the more frantic she became. Her authority had once been absolute. Neighbors jumped at her warnings, obeyed her flyers, and whispered about her power as if she were some local monarch. Her lake preservation committee had dwindled to two diehards, both of whom looked increasingly embarrassed. By her antics, her flyers went straight into recycling bins. Even her binder, her precious binder, had lost its magic. And still, Karen couldn't let go. In her mind, losing the lake wasn't just about property lines. It was about control, about identity. For years, she had defined herself as the guardian of Willow Creek, the protector of community standards. If the lake slipped from her grip, what was she then? It's just another neighbor, one more person in a row of beige houses. To Karen, that was unthinkable. So she hatched a plan. It's a desperate, reckless plan. On a Friday evening when the lake shimmered, gold with sunset light, Karen appeared not with her clipboard or her binder, but with something new, a megaphone. She stood at the edge of the water, voice amplified for all to hear. "Attention, residents of Willow Creek," she bellowed, startling a flock of ducks into flight. "It has come to my attention that an individual is illegally occupying community land and misleading you with fraudulent documents. This so-called owner is violating multiple environmental codes and must be removed for the safety of our families. Therefore, effective immediately, I am exercising the HOA's emergency powers to seize control of this lake." Gasps rippled through the small crowd gathered at the shore. Jordan, sitting in his usual chair with his fishing rod, tilted his head in disbelief. Slowly, he set the rod aside, stood, and faced her. "Emergency powers?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying. "What is this, Star Wars? You don't have emergency powers, Karen? You don't have any powers?" Karen's sunglasses flashed as she lifted the megaphone. "Oh, but I do. The bylaws clearly state that in times of community crisis, the HOA board may take any necessary action to preserve safety and property values." The crowd chuckled. Everyone knew the bylaws didn't extend to the lake. Everyone, it seemed, except Karen. Jordan didn't laugh. He walked over to his cooler, pulled out a folded packet, and held it high. "Folks, this is the deed. It's stamped, signed, and recorded with the county. I own this lake. All of it. And I'm tired of the games. Tonight, we end this." Motioned for a young man in the crowd to come forward. It was Tommy, one of the teenagers who had filmed the whiteboard messages. In his hands, he carried a portable projector and a white sheet. With a grin, he set them up against a tree and powered it on. Suddenly, the crowd wasn't just listening, they were watching. Projected onto the sheet in bold black print was the full property survey, complete with parcel numbers, legal descriptions, and the county seal. Jordan pointed with a flashlight. "See this line? That's the boundary. See this section here? That's the lake. Every inch of it is included in my purchase. I didn't just buy the shore. I didn't just buy the meadow. I bought the water. All of it. Every reed, every cattail, every fish. It's mine. Legally, officially, and permanently," the crowd murmured. In awe, some clapped. Others leaned in closer to read the details. It was undeniable, irrefutable, and most importantly public. The illusion Karen had maintained for years was shattering before her very eyes. Still, she fought. "This is fraud." She screamed into the megaphone, her voice cracking. "You've tricked the county, tricked all of us. I will appeal. I will escalate this to the state, to the governor, to the Supreme Court, if I must." Jordan lowered the flashlight, his expression softening. "Karen, listen to yourself. You've been yelling at fishermen, kids, and families for years about rules that never existed. You've built this idea that you control something you never owned. But the truth is simple. You don't. Not now, not ever." For the first time, Karen faltered. The crowd was no longer with her. They weren't afraid, they weren't hesitant, they were free. Parents laughed, children pointed, and teenagers cheered for Jordan. A chant even started at the back of the group. "Not in your HOA. Not in your HOA." Karen's hands trembled. She lowered the megaphone slowly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on the bank. Her binder slipped from her arm and fell into the grass, pages scattering in the evening breeze. She looked around for support, for even one loyal face, but found none. Even her two die-hard committee members had drifted away, pretending to tie their shoes, defeated. She turned and walked back up the hill, shoulders hunched, sunglasses hiding what everyone suspected were tears. She didn't slam down threats, didn't snap photos, didn't yell. She simply left. The crowd erupted in cheers. Some hugged Jordan, others clapped him on the back, and the children returned to splashing in the shallows, their laughter ringing louder than it had in months. The lake had been liberated, not just from Karen's fake rules, but from the shadow of fear she had cast. That night, the water seemed to glow brighter, reflecting the stars like diamonds scattered across its surface. Families stayed late, sharing food and stories, basking in the rare joy of community without rules or fines or clipboards. Jordan sat in his chair, sipping a soda, smiling quietly as the world around him settled into peace. For Karen, it was the beginning of the end. For the lake, it was the turning point of return to freedom, safeguarded not by illusion, but by truth. And for Willow Creek, it was the night they finally realized the lake had never been Karen's to govern. It had only ever belonged to itself. Until Jordan came along with the papers to prove otherwise. The morning after Karen's retreat, the lake awoke to a peace it hadn't felt in years. The sun rose over the ridge, scattering light across the water until it shimmered like molten. Silver ducks glided lazily across the surface, unbothered by megaphones or clipboards. The breeze carried the scent of wet grass and the soft rustle of cattails instead of the sharp edge of confrontation. For the first time in months, people arrived without hesitation. Didn't whisper nervously, didn't glance over there. Shoulders for Karen's approach, they came simply to enjoy what had always drawn them here. The lake itself. Families unfolded picnic blankets on the meadow, spreading out baskets filled with sandwiches, fruit, and lemonade. Children squealed with laughter as they chased each other along the bank, splashing through the shallows. Fishermen returned with their gear, casting lines into the water with easy confidence. Their shoulders no longer hunched in fear of reprimand. Even the teenagers who had once avoided the place altogether came back, music drifting softly from a portable speaker, their voices raised in carefree chatter. It was as though the lake itself breathed easier, its waters sparkling brighter, its atmosphere lighter. The invisible weight that had hung over it was gone, lifted with the fall of Karen's illusion. Jordan sat in his usual chair near the shoreline, sipping from a thermos of coffee instead of a soda this time, his fishing rod resting casually in the crook of his elbow. Wasn't a man given to boasting, but he couldn't deny the small smile tugging at his mouth as he watched the scene unfold. The lake, his lake, was alive again, not as a private retreat for himself alone, but as a space where the community could gather freely. And that was the paradox. Yes, Jordan owned the lake. The deed was in his name, the property lines etched permanently into county records. But ownership, as he saw it, didn't mean exclusion. It meant stewardship. It meant protecting the place from those who would smother it with rules or fence it off for profit. For Jordan, the lake wasn't just real estate. It was memory, beauty, and freedom. And those things were meant to be shared. The people of Willow Creek began to see him differently. At first, they had viewed him with suspicion, wondering what kind of man bought an entire lake. But his actions spoke louder than Karen's accusations ever could. He didn't chase people away. He didn't charge admission or demand permits. He welcomed them with a smile, a cold drink, or even a fishing lesson if they lingered nearby. He became less of an outsider and more of a quiet guardian, someone who had the authority to enforce ownership, but chose instead to cultivate trust. It was this attitude that slowly mended the fractures Karen had left behind. Neighbors who had once been divided, those who supported Karen's faux rules and those who defied them, found common ground again. They laughed about the absurdity of the Lake Preservation Committee, replayed the memory of Karen paddling out in her kayak, and shared stories of Jordan's calm defiance. The lake became a symbol of unity, not conflict. Karen, meanwhile, was rarely seen. For weeks after her humiliating defeat, she retreated into her beige two-story home at the end of Maple Court. Her curtains stayed drawn. The binder that had once accompanied her everywhere was spotted sitting abandoned on the back seat of her car. Rumors swirled. Some said she was drafting new bylaws in secret. Others claimed she was plotting to move to another subdivision where her talents might be better appreciated. But the truth was simpler. Karen had lost her stage, and without it, she was just another neighbor with too much time and too few friends. Every so often, people spotted her walking past the lake with binoculars, muttering under her breath as she watched families splash and fish without her interference. But she never approached. Perhaps she was waiting for an opportunity to strike back, or perhaps she finally understood that her reign had ended. Either way, her presence no longer carried weight. The community had chosen freedom over fear, and no clipboard could undo that. As autumn rolled in, the lake changed with the seasons. Leaves drifted down in fiery shades of red and orange, floating on the surface until the wind carried them away. Families traded swimsuits for jackets, but they still came to picnic and fish, still came to laugh and linger. Jordan built a small fire pit on the bank, inviting neighbors to gather on crisp evenings for roasted marshmallows and shared stories. The lake had never been busier, never been more loved. It was at one of these gatherings, with flames flickering and smoke curling, into the night that Jordan addressed the crowd. He stood, hands tucked into his pockets, voice steady but warm. "Look, I know it's a little unusual, one guy owning a lake. But I want to make something clear. This place doesn't belong to just me, it belongs to all of us. I've got the deed, sure, but what good is a lake if it's empty? What good is peace if it's kept to yourself? So as long as I'm here, this lake will stay open. Respect it, treat it right, and it'll always welcome you back." Applause rippled around the fire. Parents nodded, children beamed, and the teenagers, usually too cool to show enthusiasm, actually clapped along. It wasn't just gratitude they felt, it was relief. For so long they had lived under Karen's shadow, convinced that control was inevitable, that freedom always came with a price. Now, they had proof that it didn't have to be that way. From that night on, the lake took on new meaning. It wasn't just a body of water. It was a testament to resilience, to the idea that truth could outlast illusion, that kindness could outshine control. It became part of the community's identity, not because an HOA declared it so, but because people claimed it with laughter, with memories, with love. And so the story of Karen and the lake faded into legend. Neighbors told it like a fable, the tale of the woman who tried to rule what she never owned, and the man who calmly reminded her and everyone else what ownership really meant. Told it humorously, embellishing Karen's megaphone speeches or Jordan's witty signs. Others told it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. But however it was told, the ending was always the same. The lake endured, free and alive, because someone cared enough to stand up to illusion. As winter approached, frost edged the reeds, and the water mirrored the pale sky. Children threw snowballs on the frozen banks, fishermen traded rods for skates. And Jordan still came every morning with his thermos of coffee, smiling at the life unfolding around him. The lake was his. Yes, but in the truest sense, it had always belonged to everyone who loved it. And above the shoreline, nailed firmly into the earth, the sign remained. The bold black letters hadn't faded. The red paint still burned bright. "Karen, I'm not in your HOA. This lake is mine." It was no longer just a declaration of ownership. It was a symbol of freedom, a reminder that no binder, no bylaw, and no Karen could ever cage the spirit of a place meant to be free. The lake was reborn.